What you are about to hear are voice memos. A young woman found my channel at 3 in the morning during the fourth week of not sleeping properly. She sent me 11 recordings over the course of about 2 months. No introduction, no explanation, just a link to a file sharing folder with a message that said, "I don't know what to do with these. Maybe you will." I've been sitting on them for 6 weeks trying to decide what to do with them. I transcribed them. All 11. What I'm reading to you tonight is the full account in sequence. Her words, her pauses, her exact phrasing. I've changed her name and one or two identifying details at her request. Everything else is exactly as she recorded it. Her name, for our purposes, is Maya. She was 26 years old when the first recording was made. Here is Memo 1. Memo 1. Okay, I don't know why I'm recording this. I guess because if I say it out loud, it becomes a thing that happened instead of just a thing I'm trying to convince myself didn't happen. It's 4:30 in the morning. I've been awake since 2. I was asleep and then I wasn't. That's the only way I can describe it. Like a switch. 1 second I was completely out, and the next I was completely awake, except my body wasn't awake. My body was still asleep. I could feel the bed under me. I could feel the pillow. I could feel that my eyes were open and I was looking at the ceiling, but I could not move, not a finger, not my jaw. I tried to scream and nothing happened. The signal from my brain just stopped somewhere before it arrived. And there was something in the corner. I'm a graphic designer. I work with visual information all day. I'm good at identifying what I'm looking at. I know the difference between a shape in the dark that's just a coat on a chair and a shape in the dark that is something else. This was something else. It was in the corner by the window, just standing there, not moving, not doing anything, just there. In the way that a thing is there when it has been there for a long time and is very comfortable being there. I don't know how long it lasted, long enough that I had time to go through the whole rational checklist: sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucination, too much caffeine, stress, the new apartment, the new job. I went through all of it while I lay there unable to move, and the thing stood in the corner and watched me. Then it was over, the paralysis released, and I sat up, gasping, and the corner was empty. I'm fine. I'm a rational person. I'm recording this because I want a record of the exact details while they're fresh, not because I'm genuinely frightened. I'm fine. Memo 2. This is the second time. Different night. 3 nights after the first one. Same thing, same switch from sleep to paralysis, same inability to move or make sound, but this time it wasn't in the corner. It was closer, beside the bed, standing right beside the bed, looking down at me, and I couldn't see a face. I want to be precise about this because details matter. I couldn't see a face, not because it was too dark, but because it didn't seem to have one in any way I could register, like that part of my visual processing just returned an error, like my brain looked at whatever was where the face should be and said no and moved on, and then it put its weight on me. That's the only way I can say it. It didn't climb on me. It didn't move in any way I could track. One moment it was standing beside the bed, and the next its weight was on my chest, and I felt it the way you feel gravity, completely, without drama, just as a fact of physics. I couldn't breathe properly, not because my airway was blocked, because the weight was too much, like lying under something that had no right to be as heavy as it was. And then I heard something. I used the word heard, but that's not quite right. It was more like, you know how sometimes you read something and you don't hear it in your ears, but you understand it? It was like that. Information arriving without the usual channel. It wasn't words. It was more like the emotional content of words without the words themselves. An impression of something, like standing next to someone who is very hungry and feeling their hunger even though they said nothing. What I felt from whatever was on my chest. I'm going to stop for a second. What I felt was appetite, a very old, very patient appetite, like something that has been hungry for so long it barely registers the hunger anymore. It's just the condition of its existence. Then it was gone, and I could breathe and move. I'm less fine than I was 3 nights ago, where Memo 3. I've been reading. I do that when I can't solve something. I read until I find the edges of it. Sleep paralysis is documented extensively. The sensation of a presence, the inability to move, the weight on the chest, all of it appears across cultures going back thousands of years. The old hag in Newfoundland folklore, the mare in Scandinavian tradition, the Siam in Thailand, the Kanashibari in Japan. Every culture that has ever existed has a name for this. That level of consistency across completely isolated traditions usually means one of two things. Either it's a universal neurological experience that cultures have independently mythologized, or it's a real thing that everyone has independently encountered and tried to name. I keep finding accounts from West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Benin. There's a category of night spirit described across multiple traditions in that region that doesn't map cleanly onto anything I've found elsewhere. It doesn't have one consistent name because it seems to predate the naming systems. The accounts are old. Some of them appear in the notes of early anthropologists as things that informants described in extremely low voices, the way you describe something you don't want to give more attention to by discussing too loudly. The consistent elements across accounts. It sits on the chest. It feeds on something described variously as life force, vital energy, the animating principle, the thing that makes a living person different from an object. It doesn't take it all at once. It comes back, night after night, taking a little each time. People who are visited consistently by this thing don't die dramatically. They just diminish. Lose appetite for their own lives, become quieter, slower, less present, until one day they simply don't wake up. I found one account that described it as having been in a location long before any human structure was built there, that it attaches to place rather than person, that the person is just what's available in that place at that time. I've been in this apartment for 8 weeks and I'm recording this at 6 a.m. because I didn't sleep at all last night. Not because it came again, because I was afraid it would come again, and the fear of it is starting to be as bad as the thing itself. Memo 4. It touched me. I need to say that plainly first because everything else I have to say is complicated and that part isn't. Same paralysis, same weight, but this time I felt fingers, individual fingers, pressing into my sternum, not violently, methodically, like someone feeling for something specific inside a drawer in the dark. Pressing and releasing, pressing and releasing. I screamed for approximately 20 minutes inside a body that produced no sound. When it released, I got up and turned on every light in the apartment and sat on the kitchen floor until it got light outside. I called in sick to work today. I've been on my laptop for 9 hours. I found an academic paper. The author is a professor of religious studies at a university in Lagos who spent 12 years doing fieldwork on indigenous spiritual practice across 3 countries. The paper is dense and technical, and most of it is outside what I needed. But there's a footnote, page 47. I've read it so many times I could probably recite it. The footnote references multiple independent oral accounts gathered across 3 separate countries from informants who had no contact with each other, all describing the same method for binding a night spirit during the window of contact, not exorcism, not destruction. Binding, trapping it in a physical object at the exact moment of contact when the connection between the spirit and the person is most direct and therefore most exploitable. The professor notes he cannot personally verify the method. He includes it only because the consistency of the accounts across completely isolated sources suggests it represents genuine traditional knowledge rather than urban legend or contamination. He provides the method in the footnote. I've read it 17 times. I'm going to try it. Memo 5. This is recorded the afternoon before I'm going to attempt it. I'm making this record because if something goes wrong, I want there to be documentation of what I tried and why. The method requires specific materials. I spent 2 days sourcing everything, some of it from a botanica in my neighborhood, some of it ordered online from suppliers of ritual materials, some of it assembled from things I had. The paper's description of each element was brief but specific, and I followed it exactly. A vessel, clay if possible, sealed, something that has never held anything before, new, empty, untouched. A binding agent applied to the outside of the vessel. The paper described a combination of specific materials I'm not going to list here, partly because I don't want to reproduce the methodology publicly, and partly because the professor was clear that attempting this without correct preparation of the materials was worse than not attempting it at all. The vessel has to be open and present during the contact, in the moment when the spirit is fully engaged, when the weight is at its heaviest, when the connection is most complete. You speak a specific phrase, not in any language I know. The phonetics are written in the paper's appendix. I've been practicing them for 2 days. The phrase isn't an incantation exactly. The professor describes it as closer to a formal demand. The vocabulary of binding in the tradition these accounts come from, a statement of terms. You are naming what is happening in the language that governs these interactions, and by naming it correctly, you are asserting authority over the moment. Then you seal the vessel. That's it. That's the whole method. I'm terrified, and I've set the vessel on my nightstand. I've prepared everything. I'm going to sleep now. If I don't record another memo, that's either because it worked, and I'm finally getting some rest, or because something went very wrong. If it's the second one, hi, I guess. Sorry you found this. Memo 6. It worked. I need to just say that first because I spent 3 days after that night not recording anything because I was processing what happened and I didn't know how to start. But it worked. Here is exactly what happened. It came, same as always, the switch, the paralysis, the weight settling onto my chest. I lay there and I let it begin its process, and I felt the fingers pressing, and I was more frightened than I have ever been in my life because this time I had to let it go further than I'd ever let it go. I had to wait until the connection was at its fullest. That's what the paper said. You bind it at the peak of contact, not at the beginning. I waited. The pressure built. The fingers pressed deeper. I felt that appetite again, that vast, patient, ancient hunger operating right against the center of my chest, and I felt something I had not felt in the previous episodes. A pull, like a tide going out. Something in me moving toward it the way water moves toward a drain. That was the peak. I could feel it. I spoke the phrase. I had practiced it for 2 days. In the paralysis, my jaw still couldn't move normally. But I learned in previous episodes that internal sound seems to function differently than external sound. The episodes aren't deaf. I had tested this. I spoke it internally with the complete specific intention the professor's notes described. Every word, exact phonetics, the full phrase. And the room changed. There's no other way to describe it. The quality of the air changed the way it changes when pressure systems shift. A sudden equalization, like ears popping but throughout the whole body. The weight on my chest didn't lift. It collapsed, like something structural giving way. And then there was a sound, not in my ears, the same channel as always, that sub-frequency, that below language, but different. Previous episodes it had been appetite, patient and indifferent. This was different. I keep coming back to the word distress, and I know how strange that sounds, but that's what it was. Something that had operated with complete confidence and patience for what felt like an enormous amount of time, suddenly encountering a constraint it hadn't encountered before. The paralysis released. I sat up, grabbed the vessel from the nightstand, sealed it with the binding agent exactly as the paper described. And then I just sat there in the dark, holding a sealed clay vessel and breathing. I could feel it in there. I know how that sounds. I could feel it the same way you feel the presence of something in a room, not through any of the normal senses, just through whatever sense it is that registers presence. It was in there, contained. Furious in the way that very old things are furious when they are constrained, not hot and explosive, but cold and absolute. I put the vessel on my desk and I went back to bed, and I slept for 14 hours. I haven't slept that well since before I moved into this apartment. Memo 7. I've had it for 11 days now.
I want to describe what it's like to have it in the apartment because it's not what I expected.
I expected to feel safer, and I do at night. I'm sleeping, genuinely sleeping, for the first time in 2 months. But during the day, there's something else, a quality to the air near the desk where I keep the vessel, not threatening, more like pressure. The sense of something very present and very still and very aware of you the way a large animal is aware of you, not about to do anything, just aware. I started talking to it. I don't know why exactly, partly because I'm someone who processes things out loud, partly because this is harder to explain. I felt like it was listening, and something in me needed it to know that I knew it was listening. I don't know if it responded. Communication is too strong a word for what happened. But when I talked near the vessel, there were moments where the quality of that pressure changed slightly. The way a person's quality of attention changes when you say something that lands. I started asking questions, not speaking them out loud. The way the binding worked, through internal sound, through intention, that seemed to be the channel. I would form a question very precisely and hold it near the vessel and wait. What I received back wasn't answers exactly, more like impressions, images that weren't quite images, emotional content without language, the same channel as always, that sub-frequency, but now I was learning to read it the way you learn to read an accent you've never heard before, slowly, in fragments. What I understood, pieced together over several sessions across those 11 days, was this. It had been in this location before any building was here. It had been in this location before the city was here. The building went up and it stayed, not by choice exactly, not with intent. It simply persisted in the way that old things persist, through the building's history, through tenant after tenant. It had continued its operation. Not noticing the humans particularly, the way you don't particularly notice the insects in a house you live in. They're just there. They're just available. I asked it about previous tenants. What came back stopped me cold. Not images of people, more like negative spaces where people had been, shapes of lives that had been in this space and then been reduced, quieted. I felt 3 of them clearly. 3 people across what felt like a long span of time who had experienced exactly what I had experienced, who had been visited, who had been drained slowly and quietly until they were simply less than they had been. None of them had done what I did. They had just diminished and left or died quietly and been replaced by the next available person in the space. I was just the next one, except I hadn't diminished. I thought about that for a long time. Memo 8. I went to the building manager yesterday with a cover story about research for a design project. I needed to look at long-term occupancy records. She was friendly and pulled the file. I need you to understand that what I found in that file was not dramatic. It was not obvious. If you didn't already know what you were looking for, you would not have seen it. 3 previous long-term tenants in this specific unit across 40 years. All of them left or were taken from the records at the same stage. Around 8 to 10 months of occupancy. The building manager noted none of this because why would she? People leave apartments all the time. One of them had a forwarding address. I found her online. She's in her 60s now. I sent a careful message. Journalists finding source energy said I was doing research on the building's history and wondered if she had any memories of living there. She replied within an hour. She said, "I don't talk about that apartment. I'll tell you one thing, and then I'd like you not to contact me again. I lived there for 9 months when I was 28. I left because I could feel myself disappearing. Not metaphorically. I mean, I could feel something in me getting quieter every week, like a volume knob being turned down very slowly. I moved out, and within a month, I felt like myself again. I've never gone back. I've never told anyone who lives there now because I didn't know how to say it. If you're living there currently, leave. That's all I have." She didn't reply to my follow-up message. I sat with her words for a long time. I could feel myself disappearing. I know exactly what she means. I felt it too in those 2 months. The edges of my appetite for things, my work, my friends, my own life feeling slightly muffled, like experiencing everything through a layer of something I couldn't name. It had been working on me from the beginning. I just happened to stop it. Memo 9. I need to tell you what I found out about what it is, because I've been working on that question since the binding, and I think I finally have enough to say it clearly. It's not a demon. I want to be precise about that because demon implies a specific cosmology, a specific moral framework, an adversarial relationship with humanity that is organized and intentional. This is not that. The closest framework I can find, and I've read everything I can access on West African indigenous spiritual ecology, which is a field that most Western occult traditions haven't touched properly, is a category of entity that exists at the level of fundamental process rather than personality. The professor's paper touches on this in its main text, though he's careful with his language. He describes a class of spirit that predates human presence in any given location and that interacts with humans not from hostility or malice, but from the same indifference with which weather interacts with humans. Weather doesn't target you. It just operates according to its nature, and you happen to be in the way. This thing feeds on vital force the way certain fungi feed on living trees. The tree isn't its enemy. The tree is just a resource in its environment. That framing should make it less frightening. Somehow, it makes it more frightening because malice can be negotiated with, intent can be redirected, indifference cannot. It was feeding on me the way it feeds on everything available in its location. I was not special. I was not chosen. I was just there. The binding changed the equation, not because I hurt it or defeated it in any moral sense, because I introduced a constraint it hadn't encountered from the previous occupants. It's contained now because I did something the other 3 didn't do. But it's still what it is, and it's still very, very old, and it is currently in a clay vessel on my desk approximately 4 feet from where I'm sitting making this recording. Memo 10. I'm moving out. I've made the decision, and I want to record the reasoning because I owe it to myself to be clear-eyed about this. I could stay. The binding is holding. I'm sleeping. My work is fine. My life feels like mine again. By every practical measure, I have solved the problem. But I've been sitting in this apartment with a bound entity on my desk for 6 weeks, and something about that arrangement is starting to affect me in a different way than the feeding did. The feeding took from me quietly. This is different. Spending extended time in proximity to something that old and that aware, even contained, is like working in a room with a very large electrical current. You don't get struck, but you feel the field, and the field changes things over time in ways that are slow and subtle and hard to name until they're significant. I'm not diminishing. If anything, I'm sharper than I was before all of this. I notice things differently. I understand things about the texture of a room, the quality of attention in a space that I didn't understand before. I'm not sure that's entirely good. I'm moving to a new city, new apartment. I've been planning to for a while anyway. This city was always temporary. The job is remote. The timing is right. The question is what to do with the vessel. I can't take it. I know that sounds irrational, but I have spent 10 weeks developing a very specific sensitivity to what is and isn't rational in this particular situation, and taking it with me is not rational. It is attached to this location. The binding holds within the logic of the tradition it was performed in, and the logic of that tradition is spatial. Take it far enough from its location, and I don't know what the binding does. I'm not willing to find out. I can't destroy it. I've researched this extensively. The professor's paper has nothing on destruction. Everything else I've found suggests that attempting to destroy a bound entity of this category is inadvisable. The word several independent sources use is inadvisable in a way that clearly means something much stronger than inadvisable, but that they don't want to write plainly. So I'm leaving it. I'm going to seal the vessel with a secondary layer of the binding material. Put it somewhere in the apartment where it won't be easily found or disturbed. Behind the radiator in the back bedroom, inside the wall cavity where the plasterboard is loose. It will be there, bound, contained. The next tenant will move in and go about their life and hopefully never feel anything except the occasional low-grade unease that some apartments have that people chalk up to thin walls or strange acoustics or the particular loneliness of living alone. I know I should tell someone. Tell the building manager. Leave a note. Some kind of warning. I've thought about this more than anything else in this whole situation, and I still don't know what I would say. Who do you call? What do you report? Who has jurisdiction over a bound entity in a wall cavity in an apartment building? I'm leaving it. I'm sorry about that. I want to say that clearly. I'm sorry. To whoever moves in next, if you ever somehow hear this, I'm sorry. I didn't create this. I didn't put it there. It was there before the building, and it will be there after it. But I didn't warn you, and I'm sorry for that. I'm moving Friday. Memo 11. Last one. It's Thursday evening. Boxes everywhere. New city tomorrow. I want to end this record the right way because I don't think I'll add to it after I leave. What I know now that I didn't know 10 weeks ago, the thing in the wall is not unique. It is one example of a category of entity that exists in locations all over the world, attached to land and place and the accumulated residue of human presence, feeding slowly and quietly on whatever is available. Most people who encounter them experience it as an unexplained period of diminishment. A stretch of life that felt muffled and slow that they left behind when they moved or changed or recovered for reasons they don't fully understand. They don't know what happened, they just know that period felt wrong. A small number of people experience it as what I experienced. Direct contact, the full episode. They don't all research their way to a binding method. Most of them just try to endure it or move. I'm not special for having stopped it. I'm just stubborn, and I had access to an obscure academic paper at the right moment. The vessel is in the wall. The binding is holding. I can feel it, that pressure, that contained, aware stillness, even from across the apartment. I've been trying to decide how I feel about leaving it, and I keep arriving at the same uncomfortable answer, which is that I feel something close to guilty. Not because I trapped it. It was feeding on me. I don't feel guilty about stopping that. I feel guilty because at some point in the last 6 weeks, in those sessions where I sat near the vessel and asked questions and learned to read the impressions that came back, somewhere in that process, I started to understand it, not to like it, not to excuse it, but to understand that it exists within a logic entirely its own that has nothing to do with human moral frameworks and never did. It's hungry. It has always been hungry. It will be hungry in that wall until the building falls down, or until someone else finds it, or until something I can't predict changes the binding. It never wanted to hurt me specifically. It just wanted to eat. I'm not sure what to do with that. Moving day tomorrow. New city, new apartment, something small on the 3rd floor with big windows and no history, I hope. That's the last memo. I've listened to all 11 of these recordings more times than I can count, trying to decide what I think happened to Maya. Whether I believe her. Whether any framework I have can hold what she describes. Here's where I land. Sleep paralysis is real, documented, universal. Every culture that has ever existed developed language for it before science did, which means human beings have been lying awake, paralyzed, and terrified in the dark since before they had words for it. The academic paper she references is real. I found it. Page 47. The footnote is there exactly as she describes. The binding method in the footnote, I'm not going to read it aloud. If you want to find it, you can find it. I'm not going to be the thing that puts that into more people's hands than necessary. What I will tell you is this. Somewhere in a building in a city Maya no longer lives in, there is an apartment with a clay vessel sealed inside a wall cavity behind a radiator. Someone is living in that apartment right now. They may be sleeping fine. They may have moved in and felt nothing and chalked up the occasional unease to thin walls or old pipes or the particular atmosphere of other people's spaces. Or they may have started waking at 2 a.m, unable to move, feeling a weight they can't explain settle onto their chest. Feeling fingers press, feeling something ancient and patient and indifferent begin its slow, quiet, careful work, turning the volume down one night at a time. Asterisk.